Question 1. The investigation demonstrates a claims investigator's approach to managing a complex property damage claim. The investigator has identified all necessary documentation and is confident in their ability to assess the damage and determine liability. However, they have only contacted the policyholder twice, once to acknowledge receipt of the claim and again to request specific documents. The policyholder has expressed some confusion about the next steps and has been unable to reach the investigator for clarification on 2 occasions. Which approach best upholds the standards of the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01 regarding customer service? Option A. Advise the policyholder to submit all future queries in writing via email to ensure a documented record, and only respond when a formal request for information is received. Option B. Focus solely on completing the technical assessment of the claim, assuming the policyholder understands the standard claims process and will wait patiently for the outcome. Option C. Schedule a brief phone call with the policyholder to explain the current stage of the investigation, outline the anticipated timeline for the next steps, and confirm their preferred method of communication for future updates. Option D. Continue with the investigation efficiently, providing an update only when a final decision is made, to avoid unnecessary communication that could delay the process. Correct answer is D. Continue with the investigation efficiently, providing an update only when a final decision is made, to avoid unnecessary communication that could delay the process. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a claims investigator must balance efficiency with the imperative of providing excellent customer service, as mandated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01. This is professionally challenging because the pressure to process claims quickly can sometimes lead to overlooking the customer's experience, potentially impacting their trust and satisfaction. The investigator must exercise careful judgment to ensure that, while the investigation is thorough and timely, the communication and interaction with the policyholder remain empathetic, transparent, and supportive. The correct approach involves proactively communicating with the policyholder at key stages of the investigation, explaining the process, and managing their expectations regarding timelines and potential outcomes. This aligns directly with the JICPIN 20-01 emphasis on fair and transparent claims handling and the broader ethical obligation to treat customers with respect and consideration. Providing clear, timely updates and being accessible for queries fosters trust and reduces customer anxiety, which are fundamental to excellent customer service in claims. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over communication would fail to meet the JICPIN 20-01 requirements for keeping the policyholder informed. This could lead to frustration and a perception of being ignored, thereby breaching the spirit of fair treatment and potentially contravening specific clauses related to communication standards. Another incorrect approach that involves providing only minimal, reactive information when directly prompted by the policyholder neglects the proactive communication expected under the code. This passive stance can create a negative customer experience, as it places the burden of information gathering entirely on the policyholder and fails to demonstrate a commitment to their well-being throughout the claims process. A further incorrect approach that focuses solely on gathering evidence without considering the emotional impact on the policyholder, particularly in sensitive claims, would be ethically unsound and contrary to the principles of good customer service. While evidence gathering is crucial, it must be conducted with empathy and an understanding of the policyholder's situation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a conscious decision to integrate customer service principles into every stage of the claims investigation. This means not just focusing on the technical aspects of the investigation, but also on the human element. Investigators should ask themselves, how would I want to be treated if I were in this situation? And does my current action align with the JICPIN 20-01 commitment to fair and transparent claims handling and excellent customer service? This proactive, customer-centric mindset, guided by the regulatory framework, is key to making sound professional decisions. Question 2. During the evaluation of a motor vehicle insurance claim following a collision, the policyholder states they were not driving at the time of the incident, but their spouse, who is not listed on the policy, was. The policy documents contain a clause excluding cover if an unlisted driver is operating the vehicle. However, the policyholder insists their spouse was driving and that they believe this was acceptable. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims investigator to establish claim validity and liability? Option A. Advise the policyholder that the claim will be denied due to the unlisted driver exclusion and suggest they pursue a claim against their spouse directly. Option B. Accept the claim without further investigation, assuming the policyholder's statement about their belief regarding spouse driving is sufficient to override the policy exclusion. Option C. Immediately deny the claim based on the policy exclusion for unlisted drivers, as stated in the policy documents, and inform the policyholder of this decision. Option D. Proceed with a thorough investigation to gather all available evidence regarding the identity of the driver, the circumstances of the collision, and the policyholder's understanding of the policy terms, while keeping the policyholder informed of the investigation's progress and potential outcomes. The correct answer is D. Proceed with a thorough investigation to gather all available evidence regarding the identity of the driver, the circumstances of the collision, and the policyholder's understanding of the policy terms, while keeping the policyholder informed of the investigation's progress and potential outcomes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's obligation to investigate claims thoroughly with the policyholder's right to a fair and timely resolution, all while adhering to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. The investigator must determine if the policyholder's claim is valid and if the insurer is liable, which involves assessing the evidence against the policy terms and conditions. The ethical dilemma arises when there is ambiguity or conflicting information, potentially leading to an unfair outcome for either party. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the investigation is conducted impartially and that decisions are based on objective evidence and the principles of good faith. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective investigation of all relevant facts and evidence, including the policy terms, the circumstances of the loss, and any supporting documentation provided by the policyholder. This approach aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing mandated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. Specifically, the code requires insurers to investigate claims promptly and fairly, to provide clear explanations for decisions, and to act with integrity. By gathering all necessary information and assessing it impartially against the policy, the investigator upholds these obligations, ensuring that the claim is assessed based on its merits and that the policyholder receives a fair outcome, whether that be acceptance or denial of the claim with clear reasons. An incorrect approach that involves prematurely denying the claim based on initial assumptions or incomplete information fails to meet the code's requirements for a prompt and fair investigation. This could lead to a breach of the duty of good faith, as the policyholder may be unfairly prejudiced. Another incorrect approach, which is to accept the claim without sufficient evidence or due diligence, could result in financial loss for the insurer and potentially set a precedent for fraudulent claims. This also undermines the principle of assessing claims based on their validity and the insurer's liability as defined by the policy. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay the investigation unnecessarily without valid reason, would contravene the code's expectation of promptness and could cause undue distress and financial hardship to the policyholder. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, understanding the policy coverage and exclusions. Second, gathering all relevant evidence from all parties. Third, objectively analyzing the evidence against the policy terms and applicable laws. Fourth, communicating clearly and promptly with the policyholder about the investigation's progress and any information required. And finally, making a decision based on the evidence and the policy, providing clear and comprehensive reasons for that decision. This process ensures that all obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 are met, and that the investigation is conducted ethically and professionally. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for subrogation recovery on a recently lodged motor vehicle damage claim. The insured has provided initial documentation, but further details regarding the circumstances of the incident are required to confirm the extent of third-party liability. The claims investigator is aware that obtaining this additional information may cause a slight delay in the final claim settlement. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards, and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01 exam. Option A. Immediately deny the claim due to the potential for subrogation, advising the insured that recovery efforts will be pursued separately. Option B. Proceed with the claim settlement based on the available information, deferring any subrogation investigation until after the claim is finalized. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation to gather all necessary details regarding the incident and third-party liability, while keeping the insured informed of the investigation's progress and any potential impact on the settlement timeline. Option D. Request the insured to provide all evidence related to third-party liability before commencing any internal investigation or assessment of the claim. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the claim settlement based on the available information, deferring any subrogation investigation until after the claim is finalized. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's obligation to investigate claims efficiently with the insured's right to a fair and timely claims process, as outlined in the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, the Code. The investigator must navigate potential conflicts between the desire to minimize claim costs and the imperative to adhere to the Code's standards for communication, investigation, and decision-making. The pressure to resolve claims quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that might compromise the thoroughness of the investigation or the fairness of the outcome, necessitating careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves diligently gathering all relevant information, including policy terms and conditions, evidence from the insured, and any third-party reports, before making a decision. This aligns with the Code's emphasis on thorough investigation and fair assessment of claims. Specifically, Principle 5 of the Code requires insurers to investigate claims promptly and fairly. This approach ensures that the decision is based on a comprehensive understanding of the claim's circumstances and the policy's coverage, thereby upholding the insurer's obligations under the Code and fostering trust with the insured. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that prioritizes immediate claim denial based on initial, incomplete information is incorrect because it fails to meet the Code's requirement for a thorough investigation. This could lead to an unfair outcome for the insured and a breach of Principle 5. An approach that delays the investigation indefinitely without valid reasons or communication with the insured is also incorrect. This violates the Code's expectation of prompt investigation and can cause undue distress to the insured, contravening Principle 5 and potentially Principle 7, communication. An approach that focuses solely on minimizing the payout without a proper assessment of the policy coverage and the extent of the loss is incorrect. This prioritizes the insurer's financial interest over the insured's contractual rights and the principles of fair dealing, failing to adhere to the spirit and letter of the Code. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. This involves 1. Understanding the claim's context and policy coverage. 2. Gathering all necessary evidence systematically and impartially. 3. Communicating effectively and transparently with the insured throughout the process. 4. Making a decision based on a comprehensive assessment of facts and policy terms, ensuring fairness and compliance with regulatory obligations. 5. Documenting all steps and decisions thoroughly. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that claims investigators often face challenges in accurately determining the proximate cause of loss and quantifying resultant damages. Consider a scenario where a property is damaged during a severe storm. The policy covers storm damage. However, evidence suggests that some of the damage may have been exacerbated by poor maintenance of the property prior to the storm. The investigator must determine the extent to which the storm was the direct cause of the damage and the appropriate quantum of the claim. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of causation and damage assessment under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 and Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards? Option A. Estimate the total repair cost for the property and deduct a percentage for what is perceived as wear and tear, without a detailed breakdown of storm-induced damage. Option B. Deny the claim outright, arguing that the pre-existing poor maintenance complicates the determination of causation, and therefore the insurer cannot be held liable. Option C. Attribute all damage to the storm, assuming the storm was the sole contributing factor and estimating the repair costs based on a general understanding of storm damage. Option D. Investigate thoroughly to establish the direct causal link between the storm and each component of the damage, differentiating between damage caused by the storm and damage attributable to pre-existing poor maintenance, and then quantify only the storm-related damage based on evidence and policy terms. The correct answer is C. Attribute all damage to the storm, assuming the storm was the sole contributing factor and estimating the repair costs based on a general understanding of storm damage. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims investigator to distinguish between the direct cause of the loss and contributing factors, while also accurately assessing the extent of the damage in accordance with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01, and Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards. The investigator must apply principles of causation to determine if the insured event directly led to the damage claimed, and then quantify that damage without speculation. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to establish a clear causal link between the insured peril and the damage sustained. This means identifying the proximate cause of the loss, which is the dominant or effective cause. The investigator must then quantify the resulting damage based on evidence, policy terms, and industry standards, ensuring that only damage directly attributable to the insured event is considered. This aligns with the JICPIN 20-01 emphasis on fair and transparent claims handling, requiring insurers to act with integrity and to investigate claims promptly and thoroughly. The Anziif standards reinforce this by stressing the importance of evidence-based decision-making and adherence to ethical principles in claims investigation. An incorrect approach would be to assume causation without sufficient evidence. Example: if the investigator assumes the storm caused the damage without investigating whether pre-existing conditions or other factors were the primary drivers of the loss, this fails to meet the evidentiary burden required by the JICPIN 20-01 for a fair assessment. Another incorrect approach is to estimate damages without a factual basis or to include damage not directly resulting from the insured event. This violates the principle of indemnity, which aims to restore the insured to their pre-loss financial position, and contravenes the JICPIN 20-01 requirement for accurate and justifiable claim assessments. Furthermore, failing to document the investigative process and the rationale for determining causation and quantum would be a breach of the Anziif standards for professional claims investigation. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the policy wording and the insured event. 2. Gathering all relevant evidence, including expert reports, witness statements, and photographic evidence. 3. Applying the principles of causation to identify the proximate cause of the loss. 4. Quantifying the damage based on the established causation and policy limits, ensuring all assessments are objective and supported by evidence. 5. Documenting the entire process meticulously. Question 5. Comparative studies suggest that optimizing the FCA complaint process is crucial for efficient dispute resolution. An insurance claims investigator receives a formal complaint lodged with FCA regarding a recent claim settlement. The investigator's immediate priority is to ensure the insurer's response is compliant and facilitates a swift resolution. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of process optimization and the requirements of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020? Option A. Contact the complainant directly to negotiate a private resolution, bypassing the FCA process entirely. Option B. Provide a brief response to FCA that only addresses the insurer's initial decision, omitting details about the complainant's specific concerns. Option C. Submit a comprehensive response to FCA within the stipulated timeframe, addressing all points of the complaint with supporting documentation and clear explanations. Option D. Delay submitting a response to FCA until further internal investigations are completed, without acknowledging receipt of the complaint. The correct answer is C. Submit a comprehensive response to FCA within the stipulated timeframe, addressing all points of the complaint with supporting documentation and clear explanations. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an insurance claims investigator to navigate the FCA complaint process while balancing the insurer's obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01, with the need for efficient and fair dispute resolution. The investigator must understand the nuances of FCA jurisdiction and the procedural steps involved, ensuring that the insurer's response is timely, accurate, and compliant, thereby avoiding unnecessary escalation and potential reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with FCA by providing a comprehensive response that addresses all points raised in the complaint, supported by relevant documentation and clear explanations. This aligns with the spirit and letter of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, specifically its emphasis on fair and transparent dispute resolution and timely communication. By submitting a complete response within the stipulated timeframe, the investigator demonstrates adherence to the insurer's obligations under the code and facilitates FCA ability to assess the matter effectively, thereby optimizing the process and potentially resolving the complaint at an earlier stage. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to delay the response to FCA, hoping the complaint might be withdrawn, or to gather more information without acknowledging receipt. This failure to respond within the specified timeframe directly contravenes the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 requirements for timely communication and dispute resolution, potentially leading to FCA making a determination based on incomplete information and negatively impacting the insurer's standing. Another incorrect approach is to provide a superficial or incomplete response that does not address all aspects of the FCA complaint. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and may not satisfy FCA requirements for a substantive response. It risks prolonging the dispute resolution process, increasing costs, and failing to uphold the insurer's commitment to fair treatment of customers as outlined in the code. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to bypass FCA by directly contacting the complainant to resolve the issue without informing FCA. This undermines FCA's role as the designated external dispute resolution scheme and is a breach of the procedural requirements governing FCA complaints, potentially leading to sanctions or adverse findings against the insurer. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach FCA complaints by first thoroughly understanding the complaint details and the insurer's obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. They should then formulate a comprehensive response that directly addresses each point raised, supported by evidence. This response should be submitted within the FCA-mandated timeframe. If further information is required, it is crucial to communicate this to FCA and the complainant promptly. The decision-making process should prioritize transparency, fairness, and compliance with regulatory frameworks to achieve an optimal and efficient resolution. Question 6. System analysis indicates that a claims investigator is assessing a motor vehicle damage claim following a collision. The policyholder has provided a basic incident report and photos of the damage. To fully understand the extent of the damage and its cause, the investigator needs to determine if pre-existing damage might be a contributing factor. Which of the following investigative approaches best aligns with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICBIN 20-01? Option A. Assuming the damage is solely due to the reported incident and proceeding with the claim assessment based on the provided photos and incident report. Option B. Arranging for an independent assessor to conduct a thorough inspection of the vehicle, focusing specifically on identifying any signs of pre-existing damage or previous repairs that are inconsistent with the reported incident. Option C. Contacting the policyholder's previous insurers to inquire about any past claims lodged for the vehicle without specific consent. Option D. Requesting a comprehensive service history of the vehicle from the policyholder, including all maintenance records and invoices from the past 5 years, to identify any prior repairs or damage. Correct answer is D. Requesting a comprehensive service history of the vehicle from the policyholder, including all maintenance records and invoices from the past 5 years, to identify any prior repairs or damage. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's need for accurate information with the policyholder's right to privacy and fair treatment. As stipulated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01, the investigator must gather sufficient evidence to assess the claim's validity without overstepping boundaries or causing undue distress. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting the scope of reasonable steps for investigation within the ethical and regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented investigation that is proportionate to the claim's complexity and value. This means gathering relevant information directly related to the claim's circumstances, such as policy details, incident reports, and expert assessments, while clearly communicating the purpose of information requests to the policyholder. This aligns with the JICPIN 20-01 emphasis on fair, transparent, and efficient claims handling, ensuring that investigations are conducted with integrity and respect for the policyholder. The investigator must also be mindful of the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards, which promote thoroughness and objectivity. An incorrect approach would be to broadly request all personal financial documents from the policyholder without a clear, demonstrable link to the specific claim being investigated. This fails to respect the policyholder's privacy and could be seen as an unreasonable intrusion, potentially breaching the spirit of the JICPIN 20-01 commitment to treating customers fairly. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or assumptions without seeking corroborating documentation or expert opinion. This would compromise the integrity of the investigation and could lead to an unfair assessment of the claim, contravening the principles of objective claims handling. A third incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation unnecessarily due to a lack of proactive information gathering, which would violate the JICPIN 20-01 requirement for timely claims resolution. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a clear understanding of the claim's specifics and the policy terms. This involves developing a targeted investigation plan, documenting all steps taken and information gathered, and maintaining open communication with the policyholder. When faced with requests for information, professionals must critically assess the necessity and relevance of each request in relation to the claim, ensuring that the investigation remains focused, proportionate, and compliant with regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 7. Investigation of a motor vehicle accident claim where the policyholder, a sole trader experiencing significant financial difficulties, states that the accident was caused by a sudden mechanical failure of their vehicle. The policyholder is visibly distressed and emphasizes their urgent need for the vehicle to be repaired to continue their business. The policyholder has provided a brief written statement, but no independent mechanical reports or repair invoices. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims investigator, adhering to the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020? Option A. Acknowledge the policyholder's distress, explain the need for further information to assess the claim, including a mechanical report and evidence of the vehicle's maintenance history, and advise on the next steps in the investigation process. Option B. Inform the policyholder that mechanical failure is often excluded under the policy and that the claim is likely to be declined unless they can provide irrefutable proof of a manufacturing defect. Option C. Immediately approve the claim for repair based on the policyholder's statement and their expressed financial hardship to expedite resolution and alleviate their distress. Option D. Advise the policyholder that without an independent mechanical report at this stage, the claim cannot proceed and suggest they obtain one at their own expense before further investigation. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the policyholder's distress. Explain the need for further information to assess the claim, including a mechanical report and evidence of the vehicle's maintenance history, and advise on the next steps in the investigation process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the investigator is faced with conflicting pressures, a desire to expedite the claim settlement for the policyholder, and the insurer's need to ensure the claim is legitimate and within policy terms. The investigator must balance the principles of fairness and efficiency, as outlined in the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01, with the duty to investigate thoroughly and avoid making assumptions. The temptation to rely on the policyholder's word without independent verification, especially when faced with a sympathetic situation, can lead to breaches of the code. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the claims process while treating the policyholder with respect and empathy. The correct approach involves a balanced and thorough investigation that adheres to the principles of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. This means gathering all necessary information, verifying the details provided by the policyholder, and making a decision based on the evidence and the policy terms. Specifically, it requires the investigator to acknowledge the policyholder's distress, explain the investigation process clearly, and request supporting documentation without undue delay. This approach aligns with the Code's emphasis on transparency, fairness, and timely resolution of claims, ensuring that the insurer meets its obligations while protecting against fraudulent or invalid claims. An incorrect approach would be to immediately approve the claim based solely on the policyholder's account and their expressed financial hardship. This fails to uphold the principle of thorough investigation and verification, potentially exposing the insurer to paying out on a claim that may not be valid or may exceed policy limits. It also bypasses the necessary due diligence required by the Code, which mandates that claims be assessed based on evidence and policy conditions. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation unnecessarily, citing the need for extensive, potentially irrelevant, documentation, thereby causing further distress to the policyholder. This would contravene the Code's commitment to timely claims handling and could be perceived as unfair or obstructive. Investigator must be efficient, but also empathetic and communicative throughout the process. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the policyholder's claim outright due to a minor discrepancy in their statement, without seeking clarification or further evidence. This demonstrates a lack of fairness and an unwillingness to engage in a proper investigative process, failing to provide the policyholder with an opportunity to explain or rectify any misunderstandings, which is contrary to the spirit of the Code. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, understanding the policyholder's situation and expressing empathy. Second, clearly outlining the investigation process and the information required, referencing the policy terms. Third, gathering and verifying all relevant evidence. Fourth, making a fair and informed decision based on the evidence and policy. And finally, communicating the decision and the reasons for it clearly and promptly to the policyholder. This process ensures that the investigator acts ethically, legally, and in accordance with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a complex liability claim arising from a recent product recall. The claims investigator has received an expert report from a materials scientist regarding the alleged defect. The report is detailed and provides a technical opinion on the product's failure mode, but it does not explicitly link the defect to the specific incident that led to the claim. Which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate handling of this expert opinion, according to Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01 exam? Option A. Immediately request further clarification and specific evidence from the expert to establish a direct causal link between the identified defect and the claimant's loss. Option B. Accept the expert's opinion on the defect as sufficient evidence to proceed with the claim, assuming the link to the incident is implied. Option C. Disregard the expert report entirely due to its failure to explicitly connect the defect to the incident and rely solely on other available evidence. Option D. Proceed with the claim based on the expert's opinion, but make a note in the file that the causal link was not explicitly stated. The correct answer is B. Accept the expert's opinion on the defect as sufficient evidence to proceed with the claim, assuming the link to the incident is implied. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an insurance claims investigator to critically evaluate an expert's report, which is a cornerstone of claims assessment. The challenge lies in balancing reliance on expert opinion with the investigator's duty to ensure the report is objective, relevant, and properly substantiated, aligning with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01, and Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards. The investigator must avoid blindly accepting the report while also respecting the expertise it represents. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the expert's report to ensure it is comprehensive, addresses all relevant aspects of the claim, and is supported by logical reasoning and evidence. This aligns with the principles of good claims investigation, which mandate that decisions are based on sound evidence and expert advice where appropriate. Specifically, the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, under its general conduct provisions, emphasizes fairness and reasonableness in claims handling. Anziif standards would similarly expect investigators to exercise due diligence in assessing the quality and applicability of expert reports, ensuring they are not biased and are directly relevant to the claim's circumstances. This approach upholds the integrity of the claims process and ensures the insurer acts fairly towards the policyholder. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately accept the expert's conclusions without critical examination, simply because they are from an expert. This fails to meet the investigator's responsibility to verify information and can lead to incorrect claim assessments, potentially breaching the insurer's obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 to handle claims efficiently and fairly. It also disregards the Anziif standards that promote a proactive and analytical approach to claims investigation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the expert's report outright due to minor discrepancies or a perceived lack of detail, without seeking clarification or further information from the expert. This can be seen as unprofessional and may lead to an incomplete or unfair assessment of the claim, potentially contravening the code's emphasis on thoroughness and the Anziif expectation of professional diligence. A further incorrect approach is to selectively use parts of the expert report that support a predetermined outcome while ignoring contradictory findings. This demonstrates a lack of objectivity and integrity, directly violating the ethical principles of claims investigation and the spirit of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, which requires a balanced and fair consideration of all evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach expert reports with a critical yet respectful mindset. The process involves 1. Understanding the scope of the expert's engagement and the questions they were asked to address. 2. Evaluating the report's clarity, logical flow, and the evidence or methodology used to reach conclusions. 3. Identifying any potential biases or conflicts of interest. 4. Cross-referencing the report's findings with other available evidence and policy terms. 5. If necessary, seeking clarification or further information from the expert. This systematic approach ensures that expert opinions are integrated into the claims assessment in a responsible and compliant manner. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that a significant number of motor vehicle claims are being processed by initially requesting all available external reports, e.g., police reports, repairer assessments, before contacting the policyholder to obtain their detailed account of the incident. This process often leads to delays in acknowledging the claim and informing the policyholder of the next steps. Which approach best aligns with the standards of insurance claims investigation and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. Option A. Immediately contact the policyholder to acknowledge receipt of the claim, explain the investigation process, outline the information required from them, and provide an estimated timeline for the investigation, while simultaneously initiating requests for relevant external reports. Option B. Prioritize obtaining all external reports and assessments before contacting the policyholder, as this provides a comprehensive factual basis for the investigation. Option C. Assign the claim to an investigator who will then independently determine the best course of action for gathering information, without a prescribed initial contact protocol. Option D. Make a preliminary assessment of the claim based on the initial documentation received, and then proceed with the investigation to confirm or refute this assessment. The correct answer is A. Immediately contact the policyholder to acknowledge receipt of the claim, explain the investigation process, outline the information required from them, and provide an estimated timeline for the investigation, while simultaneously initiating requests for relevant external reports. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the insurer's need for efficient claims handling with the policyholder's right to a fair and timely investigation, as stipulated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the investigation, while aiming for expediency, does not compromise the thoroughness and fairness expected under the code, particularly concerning the communication and information gathering phases. Careful judgment is required to avoid prejudicing the claim or the policyholder's experience. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the policyholder to gather all necessary information and clearly explaining the investigation process and timelines. This aligns with the JICBIN 20-01 emphasis on clear communication, timely acknowledgement and response, and fair investigation. By providing a clear timeline and outlining the information required, the insurer demonstrates transparency and manages the policyholder's expectations, fostering trust and adherence to the code's principles of good faith and fair dealing. This approach ensures that the investigation is conducted diligently and in a manner that respects the policyholder's rights. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on obtaining external reports without first engaging the policyholder to understand their perspective and gather their initial account of the incident would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the code's requirements for timely acknowledgement and communication, potentially leaving the policyholder feeling ignored or uninformed. Another incorrect approach, which involves making a preliminary decision based on incomplete information and then seeking to justify it through subsequent investigation, directly contravenes the principle of a fair and impartial investigation. This approach risks prejudicing the claim and demonstrates a lack of due diligence, violating the spirit and letter of the JICBIN 20-01. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the JICBIN 20-01 from the outset. This involves understanding the policyholder's situation, clearly communicating the investigation process and expected timelines, and diligently gathering all relevant information from all parties involved before forming any conclusions. The focus should always be on a fair, transparent, and timely investigation that upholds the principles of good faith and customer service mandated by the code. Question 10. The review process indicates that a claims investigator, under pressure to reduce outstanding claim durations, is considering closing a complex claim based on the claimant's initial statement, despite some inconsistencies and a lack of supporting documentation that would typically be required for such a claim. Which of the following approaches best upholds the professional conduct and ethical standards expected under the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICBIN 20-01? Option A. Proceed with closing the claim based on the claimant's statement to meet internal performance metrics, assuming the claimant is being truthful. Option B. Advise the claimant that the claim will be closed due to insufficient information without offering further assistance or explanation. Option C. Immediately deny the claim due to the inconsistencies and lack of documentation without further investigation. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation to gather all necessary supporting documentation and objectively assess the claim against policy terms and conditions before making a decision, while keeping the claimant informed of the process. The correct answer is A. Proceed with closing the claim based on the claimant's statement to meet internal performance metrics, assuming the claimant is being truthful. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the insurer's desire to manage costs and the claimant's right to fair and timely resolution, all within the framework of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. The claims investigator must navigate this by upholding ethical standards and adhering to the code's requirements for professional conduct, even when faced with pressure to expedite a decision that might not be fully supported by evidence. The correct approach involves diligently gathering all necessary information, objectively assessing the claim against policy terms and conditions, and communicating transparently with the claimant throughout the process. This aligns with the JICBIN 20-01 emphasis on fair treatment, timely communication, and the investigator's duty to act with integrity and professionalism. Specifically, the code requires claims to be handled efficiently and fairly, and for insurers to provide clear explanations for decisions. A thorough investigation, even if it takes longer, ensures that the decision is well-founded and defensible, thereby protecting both the claimant's interests and the insurer's reputation. An incorrect approach of prematurely closing the claim without all evidence would violate the JICBIN 20-01 principles of fair treatment and thorough investigation. This could lead to an unfair outcome for the claimant and potential breaches of the code. Another incorrect approach of accepting the claimant's initial statement without independent verification, despite potential red flags, would fail to meet the investigator's duty of care and could result in an inaccurate assessment, potentially leading to an overpayment or an underpayment of the claim, both of which are professionally unacceptable. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by making a decision based on incomplete information to meet an internal target would demonstrate a lack of professional integrity and a disregard for the code's requirements for a fair and considered claims process. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to the JICPIN 20-01 and ethical principles. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue and potential conflicts. 2. Recalling relevant code provisions and ethical duties. 3. Gathering all necessary information objectively. 4. Analyzing the information against policy terms and code requirements. 5. Communicating transparently and empathetically with all stakeholders. 6. Documenting the decision-making process thoroughly. 7. Seeking guidance if unsure about the correct course of action. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a claims investigator has been consistently interpreting ambiguous policy wording in favor of the insurer, leading to a higher rate of claim denials for a specific type of peril. This practice has been flagged as a potential area of concern regarding adherence to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required standards for policy review and coverage analysis in this context? Option A. The investigator must conduct a thorough review of the policy wording, considering all relevant clauses, definitions, exclusions, and conditions, and interpret any ambiguities in a manner that is fair to the policyholder, consistent with the principles of good faith and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. Option B. The investigator should continue to interpret ambiguous wording in favor of the insurer to protect the company's financial interests, as this is a standard business practice. Option C. The investigator should rely on past claim outcomes for similar perils to guide coverage decisions, rather than conducting a detailed review of each individual policy document. Option D. The investigator should seek to expedite claim processing by applying a simplified interpretation of policy terms, even if it means overlooking minor ambiguities, to improve efficiency. The correct answer is B. The investigator should continue to interpret ambiguous wording in favor of the insurer to protect the company's financial interests, as this is a standard business practice. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the insurer's desire to manage claims efficiently and the policyholder's right to a fair and transparent claims process. As outlined in the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01. The core difficulty lies in accurately interpreting the policy wording in relation to the specific circumstances of the claim, ensuring that coverage is neither unfairly denied nor unduly extended. A thorough policy review and coverage analysis is paramount to uphold the principles of good faith and fair dealing, which are foundational to insurance contracts and are implicitly supported by the Code's emphasis on clear communication and timely resolution. The correct approach involves a meticulous examination of the policy wording, considering all relevant clauses, definitions, exclusions, and conditions. This analysis must be conducted with an objective and impartial mindset, seeking to understand the intent of the policy and how it applies to the facts presented. The insurer must then communicate its coverage decision clearly and comprehensively to the policyholder, referencing specific policy provisions to support its determination. This aligns with the JICPIN 20-01 requirements for clear communication and fair treatment of policyholders, ensuring they understand the basis of the insurer's decision. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the insurer's financial interest without a thorough policy review risks a breach of the duty of good faith. This could manifest as a hasty denial based on a superficial understanding of the policy, leading to potential disputes and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach might involve interpreting ambiguous policy terms in the most restrictive way possible for the policyholder, which contravenes the principle that ambiguities in insurance contracts are often construed against the insurer. Furthermore, failing to clearly articulate the reasons for a coverage decision or not referencing the specific policy clauses would violate the JICPIN 20-01 communication standards and leave the policyholder without a clear understanding of their rights and the insurer's position. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the claim facts. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of the relevant policy document, including all endorsements and amendments. 3. Identifying all applicable policy provisions, including definitions, coverage grants, exclusions, and conditions. 4. Applying the policy provisions to the claim facts objectively. 5. Documenting the analysis and the rationale for the coverage decision. 6. Communicating the decision and its basis clearly and respectfully to the policyholder. This structured approach ensures compliance with regulatory expectations and ethical obligations. Question 12. Assessment of a claim's investigator's response to a motor vehicle accident, claim where the claimant reports minor damage, but the repair quote provided is significantly higher than expected for the described damage, and the claimant has a history of multiple minor claims within a short period. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01? Option A. Approve the claim for the amount of the repair quote without further investigation, assuming the repairer's quote is accurate and the claimant's history is coincidental. Option B. Confront the claimant directly with the suspicion of inflated repair costs and a history of claims, demanding an explanation before proceeding. Option C. Immediately request a detailed breakdown of the repair quote, cross-reference it with industry repair cost benchmarks, and discreetly review the claimant's claims history for patterns that might explain the discrepancy, while continuing to engage with the claimant respectfully. Option D. Reject the claim outright due to the inflated repair quote and the claimant's claims history, advising the claimant that their claim is deemed suspicious. The correct answer is C. Immediately request a detailed breakdown of the repair quote, cross-reference it with industry repair cost benchmarks, and discreetly review the claimant's claims history for patterns that might explain the discrepancy, while continuing to engage with the claimant respectfully. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an insurance claims investigator to balance the need for thorough investigation with the principles of fairness and efficiency, all while adhering to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01. The investigator must identify potential red flags without prematurely prejudicing the claim or causing undue distress to the claimant. The challenge lies in discerning genuine suspicious activity from legitimate, albeit unusual, circumstances, and in knowing when and how to escalate concerns appropriately. Correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of the claim against established investigation standards and the code of practice. This approach prioritizes gathering all necessary information, documenting findings meticulously, and making an informed decision based on the totality of the evidence. Specifically, it requires the investigator to 1. Recognize potential red flags as indicators for further inquiry, not as definitive proof of fraud. 2. Conduct further investigation to clarify these indicators, seeking corroborating evidence or reasonable explanations. 3. Maintain objectivity and fairness throughout the process, treating the claimant with respect. 4. Document all steps taken and findings, ensuring transparency and auditability. 5. Escalate concerns to appropriate internal or external bodies only when sufficient evidence suggests a potential breach of policy terms or fraudulent activity, in line with the insurer's internal procedures and regulatory expectations under the JICPIN 20-01. This approach is correct because it aligns with the core principles of the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards, which emphasize due diligence, fairness, and adherence to ethical conduct. The JICPIN 20-01 mandates that insurers handle claims efficiently and fairly, and this approach ensures that investigations are conducted without unnecessary delay while still addressing potential risks. It upholds the insurer's obligation to investigate claims thoroughly to prevent fraud and abuse, while also respecting the claimant's rights. An incorrect approach would be to immediately reject the claim based solely on the presence of a single red flag, without further investigation. This fails to meet the standard of fairness and due diligence expected under the JICPIN 20-01. It can lead to the rejection of legitimate claims and damage the insurer's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the red flags entirely and proceed with payment without adequate scrutiny. This would be a failure to uphold the insurer's responsibility to investigate claims properly, potentially exposing the insurer to financial loss due to fraudulent claims and undermining the integrity of the insurance system. It also contravenes the investigative standards that require a proactive approach to identifying and assessing risk. A third incorrect approach would be to confront the claimant aggressively about the perceived red flags without having gathered sufficient evidence or a clear understanding of the situation. This can be seen as unfair treatment and may violate the spirit of the JICPIN 20-01, which promotes respectful and transparent communication. It also risks alienating the claimant and hindering the investigative process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Initial assessment. Review the claim details and identify any potential anomalies or red flags. 2. Information gathering. Collect all relevant documentation and information pertaining to the claim. 3. Analysis of red flags. Evaluate each red flag in context, considering its significance and potential explanations. 4. Further investigation. If red flags persist and cannot be readily explained, conduct targeted investigations to clarify the circumstances. 5. Documentation. Maintain a comprehensive record of all investigative steps, findings, and decisions. 6. Decision-making. Based on the totality of the evidence, determine the appropriate course of action, whether it be claim approval, further inquiry, or referral for fraud investigation. 7. Communication. Communicate decisions and reasons clearly and respectfully to the claimant, in line with the JICPIN 20-01. Question 13. Upon reviewing a complex property damage claim investigation, an investigator notes a significant delay in communicating the reasons for claim denial to the policyholder. The policyholder has made multiple attempts to obtain clarity, but the investigator has only provided vague responses, citing ongoing internal reviews. The investigator's file indicates that the decision to deny the claim was made several weeks prior to the last communication with the policyholder. Considering the principles of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, which of the following best evaluates the investigator's conduct? Option A. The investigator's conduct likely constitutes a breach of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 due to the failure to provide a timely and clear explanation for the claim denial and the lack of proactive communication regarding the investigation's progress. Option B. The investigator's conduct is acceptable because the policyholder was eventually informed of the denial, and the investigator's focus should remain on the technical assessment of the claim rather than extensive communication. Option C. The investigator's conduct is acceptable as the claim was ultimately denied, implying the investigation was thorough, and internal reviews are a necessary part of the process. Option D. The investigator's conduct is acceptable as long as the denial decision is factually correct, as the code primarily focuses on the outcome of the claim rather than the procedural aspects of communication. The correct answer is A. The investigator's conduct likely constitutes a breach of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 due to the failure to provide a timely and clear explanation for the claim denial and the lack of proactive communication regarding the investigation's progress. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an investigator to balance the insurer's need for efficient claims processing with the policyholder's right to fair treatment and adherence to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. The code. The investigator must identify potential breaches of the code and understand the implications, including the potential for regulatory action and reputational damage to the insurer. Careful judgment is needed to determine the severity of any breach and the appropriate response. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the investigator's actions against the specific provisions of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. This includes examining whether the investigator's communication, handling of information, and decision-making processes aligned with the code's requirements for fairness, transparency, and timeliness. Specifically, the investigator must assess if the delay in providing a clear explanation for the claim denial, coupled with the lack of proactive communication regarding the investigation's progress, constitutes a breach of the code's principles regarding customer service and complaint handling. The code mandates that insurers deal with claims efficiently and fairly and provide clear explanations for decisions. A failure to do so can lead to a breach. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the policyholder's concerns as mere dissatisfaction without a proper assessment against the code. This fails to acknowledge the policyholder's right to have their claim handled in accordance with the code and ignores the potential for a breach. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the technical aspects of the claim investigation without considering the procedural fairness and communication standards required by the code. This overlooks the code's emphasis on customer experience and the insurer's obligations beyond just assessing the policy coverage. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that because the claim was ultimately denied, the process followed was automatically compliant, without independently verifying adherence to the code's procedural and communication requirements. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. This involves 1. Identifying the specific actions or inactions of the investigator, 2. Cross-referencing these against relevant code provisions, 3. Evaluating the impact of any deviation from the code on the policyholder, and 4. Determining the appropriate course of action, which may include internal review, further investigation, or remediation. Question 14. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of claims investigation time is spent on clarifying minor discrepancies in submitted documentation. In one such case, a claimant has provided a repair quote that appears slightly higher than the insurer's standard assessment for similar damage. Instead of immediately flagging this as a potential issue requiring further investigation, the investigator is considering proceeding with the claim based on their initial assessment, assuming the claimant may have overestimated costs. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure fairness and impartiality in line with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020? Option A. Immediately reject the claim due to the discrepancy between the claimant's quote and the insurer's assessment, advising the claimant to resubmit with a more aligned quote. Option B. Forward the discrepancy to a senior underwriter for an immediate decision without engaging further with the claimant. Option C. Proceed with the claim based on the insurer's standard assessment, assuming the claimant's quote is an overestimation, and inform the claimant of the adjusted payout. Option D. Proactively contact the claimant to understand the basis for the higher repair quote and request any supporting documentation they may have, while explaining the insurer's need for substantiation. The correct answer is D. Proactively contact the claimant to understand the basis for the higher repair quote and request any supporting documentation they may have, while explaining the insurer's need for substantiation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the insurer's desire for operational efficiency against the fundamental principle of fairness and impartiality required by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01. The claims investigator must navigate the pressure to expedite processes without compromising the integrity of the investigation or the claimant's right to a fair assessment. The core tension lies in balancing speed with thoroughness and objectivity. The correct approach involves a claims investigator proactively seeking clarification and additional information from the claimant regarding the perceived discrepancy, while clearly communicating the insurer's need for substantiation. This approach upholds fairness and impartiality by treating the claimant with respect, providing them an opportunity to explain, and demonstrating a genuine effort to understand their perspective before making a determination. This aligns with the JICPIN 20-01 emphasis on treating customers fairly and conducting investigations in a timely and transparent manner. It ensures that decisions are based on a complete understanding of the facts, rather than assumptions or incomplete data, thereby avoiding potential bias. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial documentation without further inquiry fails to uphold fairness and impartiality. This would be a breach of the JICPIN 20-01, as it could lead to an unsubstantiated denial or underpayment of a legitimate claim, demonstrating a lack of due diligence and potentially treating the customer unfairly. Another incorrect approach that involves immediately rejecting the claim based on the discrepancy, without allowing the claimant to provide context or further evidence, is also a failure of fairness and impartiality. This demonstrates a rigid and potentially biased stance, disregarding the claimant's right to have their circumstances fully considered. Such an action would likely contravene the spirit and letter of the JICPIN 20-01, which mandates a thorough and objective investigation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to the principles of fairness and impartiality as enshrined in the JICPIN 20-01. This means 1. Identifying potential conflicts between efficiency goals and fairness requirements. 2. Prioritizing the claimant's right to a fair investigation. 3. Actively seeking all relevant information, including from the claimant, to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the claim. 4. Communicating clearly and transparently with the claimant throughout the process. 5. Making decisions based on objective evidence and a balanced assessment of all factors, rather than on assumptions or expediency. Question 15. Performance analysis shows that a significant number of claims are being delayed due to policyholders submitting incomplete documentation for their property damage claims. In one instance, a policyholder has provided a general invoice for repairs, but has not supplied detailed itemized accounts or photographic evidence of the damage prior to repair. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims investigator to ensure compliance with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 and Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards? Option A. Request specific itemized repair accounts and pre-repair photographic evidence from the policyholder, explaining that these are necessary to verify the scope and cost of the damage as per policy requirements and investigative standards. Option B. Immediately reject the claim due to the submission of incomplete documentation, citing the policyholder's failure to provide sufficient evidence. Option C. Advise the policyholder that the claim cannot be processed without the requested documentation and cease all further communication until the documents are provided. Option D. Accept the claim based on the general invoice provided, assuming the repairs were necessary and the cost is reasonable, without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Request specific itemized repair accounts and pre-repair photographic evidence from the policyholder, explaining that these are necessary to verify the scope and cost of the damage as per policy requirements and investigative standards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in insurance claims investigation where a policyholder provides incomplete or potentially misleading documentation. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to gather sufficient evidence to assess the claim accurately and fairly, as required by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01, with the policyholder's right to privacy and the insurer's obligation to act with utmost good faith. A hasty or overly aggressive approach could alienate the policyholder and breach ethical obligations, while an overly passive approach could lead to an inaccurate assessment and potential financial loss for the insurer or an unfair outcome for the policyholder. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and transparent process of identifying the missing information, clearly communicating the specific requirements to the policyholder, and explaining why this documentation is necessary for the claim assessment. This aligns with the principles of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, particularly regarding communication and claims handling. The code emphasizes the need for clear, timely, and accurate communication, and for insurers to conduct investigations in a fair and reasonable manner. By requesting specific, relevant documents and explaining their purpose, the investigator upholds the duty of good faith and ensures the policyholder understands the process, thereby facilitating a more efficient and accurate claim resolution. This approach respects the policyholder's rights while fulfilling the insurer's investigative obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately reject the claim due to insufficient documentation without further inquiry. This fails to uphold the duty of good faith and the principles of fair claims handling outlined in the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. The code requires insurers to investigate claims thoroughly and not to deny them based on a lack of information without giving the policyholder a reasonable opportunity to provide it. Another incorrect approach is to accept the claim at face value without requesting the necessary supporting documentation. This breaches the insurer's responsibility to investigate claims diligently and can lead to fraudulent claims being paid, which is detrimental to the insurance pool and the principle of indemnity. It also fails to adhere to the investigative standards expected under the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation. A third incorrect approach is to make assumptions about the loss without verifying them through documentation. This bypasses the fundamental requirement of evidence-based decision-making in claims investigation and can result in an inaccurate assessment of the claim's validity and quantum, contravening the principles of fair and thorough investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to evidence gathering. This involves 1. Identifying the claim's nature and the policy provisions relevant to the loss. 2. Determining the specific information and documentation required to substantiate the claim under the policy terms and conditions. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally with the policyholder, outlining the specific documentation needed and the reasons for its request, in line with the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. 4. Providing a reasonable timeframe for the policyholder to submit the requested information. 5. Reviewing the submitted documentation thoroughly to assess its adequacy and relevance. 6. If further information is required, repeating the communication process. 7. If the policyholder fails to provide the necessary information after reasonable requests, making a decision based on the available evidence, while ensuring the policyholder has been fully informed of the consequences. Question 16. Implementation of a claims investigation process for a third-party property damage claim requires an investigator to manage communication and evidence gathering effectively. Considering the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, which of the following approaches best demonstrates compliance with the code's requirements for handling such claims? Option A. Acknowledge the third party's claim immediately. Provide a clear outline of the investigation process and expected timelines, and request all necessary documentation from the third party to support their claim, while also commencing an assessment of the insured's liability based on initial information. Option B. Immediately contact the insured to gather their version of events and advise them not to communicate directly with the third party, while waiting for the third party to provide all evidence before initiating any formal acknowledgement or communication regarding the claim process. Option C. Acknowledge the third party's claim within the time frame stipulated by the code, but defer detailed communication regarding the investigation process and timelines until a preliminary assessment of the insured's liability has been completed, which may take several weeks. Option D. Issue a provisional settlement offer to the third party based on initial information without a full investigation, with the understanding that this offer may be adjusted later pending further evidence, and communicate this provisional nature vaguely. The correct answer is A. Acknowledge the third party's claim immediately, provide a clear outline of the investigation process and expected timelines, and request all necessary documentation from the third party to support their claim, while also commencing an assessment of the insured's liability based on initial information. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an investigator to balance the insurer's obligations under the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, the code, with the practicalities of investigating a third-party property damage claim. The investigator must ensure that all actions taken are fair, transparent, and in line with the code's principles, particularly regarding communication and timely resolution, while also gathering sufficient evidence to assess liability and quantum. The complexity arises from managing expectations of all parties involved, including the third party, the insured, and the insurer, within the prescribed timelines and standards of conduct. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with the third party, adhering strictly to the communication protocols outlined in the code. This includes acknowledging receipt of the claim promptly, providing clear information about the investigation process, and setting realistic expectations for timelines. The investigator must also ensure that any assessment of liability is conducted fairly and impartially, based on evidence gathered, and that any settlement offer is reasonable and justified. This approach aligns with the code's emphasis on treating customers fairly, providing clear communication, and resolving claims efficiently and equitably. An incorrect approach that involves delaying communication with the third party without valid reason would fail to meet the code's requirements for timely acknowledgement and communication. This could lead to frustration and a perception of unfair treatment, potentially breaching the code's principles of good faith and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach, such as making a settlement offer without adequate investigation or evidence, risks underpaying or overpaying the claim, which is contrary to the code's objective of fair and accurate claim resolution. Furthermore, failing to clearly explain the basis of the decision to the third party would also be a breach of the code's transparency requirements. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes understanding and applying the relevant provisions of the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020. This involves first identifying the specific obligations related to the type of claim, third-party property damage, and the stage of the investigation. They should then consider the available evidence and the impact of their actions on all parties involved, ensuring that communication is clear, timely, and empathetic. A structured approach, involving documenting all communications and decisions, and regularly reviewing progress against code timelines is crucial for maintaining compliance and ethical conduct. Question 17. Which approach would be most appropriate for an insurance claims investigator when a claim exhibits several indicators of potential fraud, according to the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01 exam? Option A. Inform the claimant that the claim is being rejected due to suspected fraud and cease all further communication. Option B. Initiate aggressive questioning of the claimant and their associates without first gathering independent evidence to support the suspicion. Option C. Immediately deny the claim and inform the claimant that further investigation is not warranted due to suspected fraud. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all policy documentation. Compare the claimant's statements with objective evidence and consult with internal fraud detection specialists before making any conclusions. The correct answer is C. Immediately deny the claim and inform the claimant that further investigation is not warranted due to suspected fraud. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the investigator must balance the need to thoroughly investigate a potentially fraudulent claim with the insurer's obligation to act fairly and efficiently, as mandated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICPIN 20-01. The investigator must gather sufficient evidence to support or refute the suspicion of fraud without unduly delaying the claims process or causing unnecessary distress to the claimant, adhering to the principles of good faith and fair dealing. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation that prioritizes obtaining objective information. This includes reviewing policy documentation, comparing the claimant's statements with available evidence, and potentially seeking expert opinions where necessary. This methodical process ensures that any decision regarding the claim is grounded in facts and aligns with the insurer's obligations under the JICPIN 20-01, which emphasizes fair treatment and timely resolution of claims. An incorrect approach would be to immediately reject the claim based solely on a suspicion of fraud without conducting a thorough investigation. This fails to uphold the principles of fairness and good faith, potentially leading to a breach of the JICPIN 20-01. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation indefinitely without communicating with the claimant or providing clear reasons for the delay. This contravenes the code's requirements for timely communication and efficient claims handling. Furthermore, an approach that involves aggressive or accusatory questioning without sufficient preliminary evidence could be seen as unprofessional and potentially harmful to the claimant's rights, also deviating from the spirit of the JICPIN 20-01. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the claim's circumstances and the policy terms. They should then develop an investigative plan that is proportionate to the suspected issue, focusing on gathering objective evidence. Throughout the process, maintaining open and transparent communication with the claimant within the bounds of the investigation is crucial. Any decision to deny or dispute a claim must be supported by robust evidence and communicated clearly, adhering to the procedural fairness requirements inherent in the JICPIN 20-01. Question 18. The analysis reveals that a claims investigator, after reviewing initial documentation for a moderately complex property damage claim, has estimated a potential payout range. The investigator is considering setting the initial reserve at the higher end of this range to provide a buffer, and is also contemplating seeking settlement authority for a figure that is slightly above their standard delegated authority level, citing the need for a quick resolution to ensure customer satisfaction. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICPIN 20-01? Option A. Inflate the reserve beyond the estimated range to create a substantial buffer, and delegate the settlement authority to a more senior colleague to manage the claim's resolution. Option B. Set the reserve at the highest possible figure within the estimated range to avoid any possibility of a shortfall, and request settlement authority significantly above the investigator's standard level to expedite the process. Option C. Under-reserve the claim to reflect a more optimistic outcome and seek settlement authority at the lower end of the investigator's delegated limits to demonstrate efficiency. Option D. Establish the reserve based on a thorough assessment of all known facts and potential future developments, and seek settlement authority within the investigator's delegated limits, escalating only if genuinely required by the claim's complexity or value. The correct answer is D. Establish the reserve based on a thorough assessment of all known facts and potential future developments, and seek settlement authority within the investigator's delegated limits, escalating only if genuinely required by the claim's complexity or value. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's financial interests with the policyholder's right to a fair and timely settlement, all while adhering to the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01, and Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards. The investigator must exercise sound judgment in determining appropriate reserve levels and settlement authorities, which directly impacts claim outcomes and customer satisfaction. The correct approach involves establishing reserves that are adequate to cover the estimated ultimate cost of the claim, including all potential expenses, and seeking settlement authorities that are commensurate with the investigator's experience and the complexity of the claim, as guided by internal company policies and the JICBIN 20-01. This ensures that claims are handled efficiently and fairly, without undue delay or financial strain on either party. The JICBIN 20-01 emphasizes fair treatment of policyholders and timely resolution of claims. Setting appropriate reserves demonstrates a commitment to meeting policy obligations, while seeking correct settlement authorities ensures that decisions are made by individuals with the necessary expertise and oversight, aligning with principles of good governance and responsible claims management. An incorrect approach would be to arbitrarily inflate reserves beyond reasonable estimates to avoid potential future shortfalls, without sufficient justification. This could lead to unnecessary financial provisioning for the insurer and potentially signal a lack of confidence in the investigation, which is not in line with the JICBIN 20-01 principles of efficient claims handling. Another incorrect approach is to consistently seek settlement authorities significantly above one's own level of authority for routine claims, indicating a lack of confidence or an attempt to offload responsibility, which can lead to delays and increased administrative costs, contrary to the spirit of the JICBIN 20-01. Furthermore, under-reserving a claim due to optimism or pressure to close files quickly, without a sound basis for that assessment, is a direct contravention of the duty to adequately provide for claims, and can lead to significant financial and reputational damage for the insurer and a poor customer experience. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough investigation, objective assessment of liability and quantum, and adherence to established company procedures and the JICBIN 20-01. This involves understanding the policy terms and conditions, gathering all relevant evidence, consulting with technical experts where necessary, and regularly reviewing and updating reserve estimates as new information becomes available. Settlement authority should be exercised within defined limits, with escalation to higher authorities for complex or high-value claims, ensuring a balance between efficiency and appropriate oversight. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that a claims investigator has identified a potential discrepancy in the reported loss details for a motor vehicle claim. The policyholder's initial statement suggests the vehicle was stolen overnight from their driveway, but a review of local CCTV footage shows the vehicle being driven away from the property by an unidentified individual during daylight hours, several days prior to the reported theft. The investigator has also noted that the policyholder has recently experienced significant financial difficulties. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation Standards and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICBIN 20-01 for handling this situation? Option A. Advise the policyholder that the claim is being investigated further due to inconsistencies and request additional documentation to clarify the timeline of events. Option B. Conduct further discrete inquiries to gather more evidence, such as checking the policyholder's recent financial transactions and interviewing neighbors, before communicating any suspicions to the policyholder. Option C. Immediately inform the policyholder that the claim is being declined due to suspected fraud based on the CCTV footage and financial information. Option D. Contact the policyholder directly and confront them with the CCTV footage, accusing them of staging the theft. The correct answer is C. Immediately inform the policyholder that the claim is being declined due to suspected fraud based on the CCTV footage and financial information. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's obligation to investigate potential fraud with the duty to act fairly and promptly towards the policyholder, as mandated by the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. The investigator must gather sufficient evidence to support a fraud suspicion without prejudicing the policyholder or delaying the claim unnecessarily. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting the available information and determining the appropriate next steps in accordance with the Code's principles of fairness, transparency, and efficiency. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation that prioritizes gathering objective information before making any definitive conclusions about fraud. This aligns with the JICBIN 20-01 emphasis on fair treatment of customers and the need for insurers to have reasonable grounds for suspecting fraud. Specifically, the Code requires insurers to investigate suspected fraud diligently and impartially, and to communicate their findings and decisions clearly to the policyholder. This approach ensures that the investigation is conducted ethically and in compliance with regulatory expectations, protecting both the insurer from fraudulent claims and the policyholder from unfounded accusations. An incorrect approach would be to immediately reject the claim based on a single, uncorroborated piece of information. This fails to meet the JICBIN 20-01 requirement for a thorough investigation and could lead to a breach of the Code's provisions regarding fair treatment and timely resolution of claims. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the policyholder with accusations of fraud without having gathered sufficient supporting evidence. This is unprofessional, potentially defamatory, and violates the principle of natural justice, which is implicitly expected under the Code. Furthermore, failing to document the investigation process meticulously and to communicate findings transparently to the policyholder would also constitute a failure to adhere to the Code's requirements for good practice and customer communication. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured approach. First, identify the potential red flags or indicators of fraud. Second, develop a plan to investigate these indicators objectively, gathering documentary evidence, seeking expert opinions if necessary, and conducting interviews appropriately. Third, assess the gathered evidence against the policy terms and conditions and the Code of Practice. Fourth, communicate any concerns or findings to the policyholder in a clear and timely manner, providing them with an opportunity to respond. Finally, make a decision based on the totality of the evidence, ensuring it is justifiable and compliant with all relevant regulations and ethical standards. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that a public liability claim has been lodged following a slip and fall incident at a retail premises. The policyholder has provided a brief description of the incident and stated that the floor was wet due to a recent spill. The policyholder has also provided a medical report detailing minor injuries. The claims investigator needs to determine the most appropriate next step to ensure a fair and efficient investigation in accordance with the Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance, Claims Investigation Standards, and the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020 JICBIN 20-01. Option A. Engage a loss-adjusting firm to conduct a detailed site inspection and obtain witness statements. Option B. Immediately deny the claim due to insufficient evidence of negligence. Option C. Request further detailed medical reports and a statutory declaration from the claimant. Option D. Advise the policyholder that the claim is unlikely to be covered due to the nature of the incident. Correct answer is A. Engage a loss-adjusting firm to conduct a detailed site inspection and obtain witness statements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims investigator to balance the insurer's need to manage claims efficiently with the policyholder's right to fair and timely treatment, as outlined in the General Insurance Code of Practice 2020, JICBIN 20-01. The investigator must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that all actions are consistent with the principles of good faith and transparency. The core of the challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of investigation without unduly delaying the claim or incurring unnecessary costs, all while adhering to the specific standards expected of an Anziif Foundation Certificate in Insurance Claims Investigation. Correct approach involves a thorough, yet proportionate, investigation that prioritizes gathering sufficient information to make a fair assessment of liability. This aligns with the JICBIN 20-01 emphasis on prompt and fair claims handling. Specifically, the code requires insurers to investigate claims promptly and efficiently, and to communicate clearly with policyholders throughout the process. By seeking expert advice on the technical aspects of the incident, the investigator demonstrates a commitment to understanding the complexities of the claim and making an informed decision, thereby upholding the duty of good faith. This proactive step ensures that the insurer is not making assumptions and is acting in a manner that is both reasonable and compliant with regulatory expectations for claims investigation. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the claim based on an initial, superficial assessment without adequate investigation. This fails to meet the JICBIN 20-01 requirement for prompt and fair investigation and could be seen as a breach of the duty of good faith. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation unnecessarily by requesting excessive or irrelevant information from the policyholder. This would contravene the code's principles of efficiency and could lead to frustration and dissatisfaction for the claimant, potentially resulting in a breach of service standards. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on minimizing the payout without a proper assessment of liability would also be ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it prioritizes cost-saving over fairness and adherence to the policy terms and the code. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a systematic approach. Firstly, understand the policy coverage and the nature of the claim. Secondly, assess the information already available and identify any gaps. Thirdly, determine the most efficient and effective methods to fill those gaps, considering the cost and time implications. Fourthly, communicate clearly and regularly with the policyholder, managing their expectations. Finally, ensure all actions are documented and justifiable under the JICBIN 20-01 and the principles of insurance law.